All right, welcome everybody. It's Eric Dreiman again for another episode of the Hooks and Hoses podcast. This is the February edition. I want to welcome everybody back to the show and appreciate you tuning in. My guest this month is Chief Dave McGrail from the Denver Fire Department. Chief, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chief, and I appreciate it. And flattered and honored you would invite me, and happy to be here today and talk with you.
Well, awesome. Thanks. I'm really looking forward to picking your brain and giving the audience an opportunity to learn a little bit more about high-rise firefighting because it's certainly a challenge. It's something that not a lot of us get to do on any sort of regular basis, and it can create problems for us if we're not prepared for them. So, before we get going into the episode tonight, tell the audience a little bit about your background. Where how you got started in the fire service. Your career and what you're doing now. So.
Okay. Well, I was a young kid that always wanted to be a firefighter. My dad did 42 years on the Denver Fire Department from 1955 to 1997, and I was born in '63, and always saw him doing the job, and that was what I wanted to do from my earliest recollection, is just to follow in his footsteps and be a Denver firefighter. After high school and attended college for a bit, and I was looking to try and get hired somewhere, and I was fortunate in February of 1992, I got hired for the Aurora Fire Department. Aurora is a large city that borders Denver on the eastern side. It's about a 17-station fire department today. It has its very busy areas, and I worked for the Aurora Fire Department for 5 years, from 1982 to 1987. During that time, I was still trying to get on Denver, not because I wanted to leave Aurora, because it was a very good place, but my dream fire department was the Denver Fire Department, to follow my dad and work on the same department as him. And I lucked out. I remember standing in line to get into the old convention center in downtown Denver. It was called Kurgan Hall at the time, and I got inside there in the early '80s there to take the test, and there was about 18,000 people in the building, 8,000 I should say people in the building, and I was pretty certain I wasn't as smart as most of the people in the room. So I lucked out, a little bit of divine intervention. I got hired on the Denver Fire Department and started there in April of 1987. And I worked on the Denver Fire Department until I retired in October of 2023. But just a really great career. I got to have my dream job. I just feel very blessed that I was able to help support my family and, really have a job that I could enjoy. And it was a great experience. I worked as a company officer. In our system, there's a lieutenant's rank and then a captain's rank. And the top civil service rank is called assistant chief. And I got promoted to assistant chief in 2001, and I worked as an assistant chief till I retired in 23. An assistant chief basically does the job of what a battalion chief is in most departments. You call it a battalion chief, I know, in Indy. In Denver, it's called a district chief, but the rank of assistant chief works as a district chief out in the city. And that's what I did for most of my time in various parts of the city. My favorite time was working in downtown Denver with the high-rise buildings. My dad was a district chief down there, and I got to do that same job that he did. And I really enjoyed that because a lot of really exceptional companies in that district, guys that are into the job, makes the job a lot easier for the chief when you got guys that are into the job and want to do the job and they do it well. So, that was my career. And then, I would just add to that probably the one of the things that I think helped me with my growth to be the best firefighter I could be was just my association with other firefighters like yourself across the fire service. So, in the 90s, I started going to your city, Indianapolis, to the FDIC, and man, it just exploded from there in terms of meeting great firefighters across the fire service, being able to teach with them, being able to attend their classes. And I always tell firefighters that if you really want to be good at this profession, get out of your own four corners and see what's going on elsewhere, because you can learn a lot from firefighters from fire departments, small, medium, large, across the fire service. And when you do that, it just makes you better. So kind of like a vicarious experience, learning about the fires that somebody else went to. I think that can make you a better firefighter. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I wasn't aware that you were a legacy, but I'm in the process of becoming or the first generation of a legacy, I guess, at this point in my life. So I envy you, and hopefully my son will be able to follow in my footsteps here soon as well. So thanks for sharing that. So was there, obviously you worked in the downtown district, so most downtowns, that's where the big buildings are, right? So was that the impetus for your passion for high-rise firefighting, or did you have one specific incident that kind of was an epiphany for you, or how did you get as involved with the high-rise firefighting uh, as you are?
Well, a little bit of both. I once again watching my dad as a kid growing up. I remember him clear back to when literally when I was very young, and my mom would take us down to the firehouse, and I remember him climbing stairs in what at the time was the tallest building in downtown Denver. It's a residential building called Brooks Towers, and at the time it was the tallest building at 44 stories. But he and his crew would be in there on a regular basis for both for physical fitness and training for high-rise operations, carrying hose packs and climbing stairs. And as it turns out, that's something I'm still doing to this day. We just came back from the Fire Nugget sponsored Long Live the Engine Company Fire Conference in Santa Monica, and what an excellent job those guys did putting on a conference out there. But one of the things we did after our training program on Friday of last week is we went to the tallest building in downtown Santa Monica, and we climbed that building, and we did 5 repetitions of it so we could get our 110 flights for the 343. So in doing that, we remember Andy Fredericks and all the other great firefighters that we unfortunately lost in that tragedy. But for me, I saw the big buildings in downtown Denver and my dad working there, and I really wanted to be a part of that. And as I got on the job, I was able to be assigned to an area just outside of downtown called Capitol Hill, and then assigned downtown as a firefighter, and then as a lieutenant, and also as a captain and chief. When I was a firefighter, October of 1991 as a firefighter. Really, 2 things happened in 1991 that caused me to really start reevaluating my knowledge, or I should say my lack of knowledge in high-rise operations. One of those things, because I was obviously very interested in it, I was studying everything I could about it, and occasionally going to operations in high-rise buildings, and occasionally a working fire in a high-rise building. But in February of 1991, as you know, Eric, there was the One Meridian Plaza fire that occurred in Philadelphia. And I was interested to learn about that, and as the information came out about it, as you know, one of the first things was that standpipe system PRVs played a part in some of the problems at that fire. And when I first heard that, I didn't know what a PRV was, and I didn't know what PRV stood for. We now know that it's pressure reducing valve, pressure regulating valves in buildings. My question was, do those exist in Denver? Because I didn't know at the time. And as it turns out, they exist very, very, very widely across the entire city of Denver. So there was that piece. October of 1991, I responded on an upgraded assignment because I was working as a firefighter on our Rescue Company 1. But we responded when they upgraded an assignment from an automatic alarm to a working fire at a building called the Polo Club Condominiums in Denver. 20-story residential's got an atrium inside of it, kind of like an Embassy Suites hotel. configuration. But anyhow, that went to a third alarm plus specials, and it was just a brutal fire on the seventh floor, just a condo unit on the seventh floor. And I remember walking into the lobby after we got our assignment, and there was blue flame blowing out into the atrium. I didn't know at the time, but it was a very significantly wind impacted fire. And I had no idea what a wind impacted fire was at the time. But that fire required 4 hand lines. 3 of them were 2.5s to stop that fire. And to be honest with you, Eric, up at the door to that apartment, because we were trying and it took us forever to make a push into the apartment, we had to breach a wall between 702 and 704 to get some water on the seat of the fire to simmer it down so we could push in and finish the work. But I had a great deal of fear in my mind up there because we were deep inside of a building. We'd made a lot of turns, and I'm thinking to myself, SCBA, don't fail me now, because I'm a long way from being okay. It wasn't like a ground-based operation where maybe you could, make an emergency egress out of a window. But after that fire, I thought to myself, geez, there's a lot that I don't know about this. As we've said before to ourselves, you don't know what you don't know. So I started looking around, and I had O'Hagan's 70s vintage book on high-rise operations. There were a few other older books that were out there, but this was, once again, October of 1991, and there was no really new modern high-rise operations books out there. And that started me thinking about it a little bit. And it took me a while to get going on it. At one point in time, eventually, I contacted Chief Vincent Dunn out of New York, because I feel like he's one of the experts in high-rise operations. And I asked him, I said, are you planning on writing a book? Because I certainly am not even close to your level. And I don't want to step on someone's toes here. And I thought if he was planning on writing a book, I'd say, good, I can't wait to read it. But he said no. He says, I'm not planning on doing that. And he basically gave me some motivation to just move forward and give it a shot. So the book is a compilation of, I guess that would be the epiphany, if you will, Eric, is that Polo Club high-rise fire. But the book gave me an opportunity to think about my own experience, learn about experiences from people like yourself, and then the research involved in the book to try and put something together. I wanted to write it in a user-friendly manner to where it would be user-friendly for firefighters to look at as a guide for them to learn about how best to operate at high-rise fires and that sort of thing. So that was kind of the motivation behind the whole thing and how it kind of came about. And just like all of us, still learning today.
Absolutely.
And it's an unending battle in terms of learning about this and trying to figure out the best ways to operate in these buildings.
Well, I appreciate that. That kind of gives everybody some context, and me as well. We think about high-rise fires and we think big buildings, skyscrapers, those sorts of things, but it's not always a 40 or 50 story building, right? It could be something much shorter and still be considered high-rise. And we're going to get into more detail with some of the other questions I have here, but just in general, just to kind of set the stage for the rest of the discussion, what makes high-rise firefighting fundamentally different from, say, a low-rise or a residential incident? What are some key points or key things that when you hear that statement or that question that come to mind?
Well, it's a great question, and you made me think about a couple of things here. And one of them is that you're absolutely right. There are shorter buildings that can be certainly as challenging as a 50-story high-rise. One of the things that I'm finding most challenging in our fire service today, and nobody has really labeled these. I know that the term mid-rise is out there. I don't care for that term myself, but these very huge, usually a block long, usually take up the footprint of an entire block that you're seeing being built all over your city. I'm seeing being built all over my city because they put sprinklers in them, and then they call them fully sprinklered buildings. And I don't believe there's any such thing because there's plenty of void space to burn in these buildings. But because of the fire protection systems in these buildings, the fire protection community is allowing for things to occur that are making it more difficult for us. And most specifically, in these large footprint podium construction buildings that are principally made of lightweight wood construction, they're allowing for a 400-foot distance between hose valve outlets on the standpipe. They're allowing for fewer stairwells, and that's making our life much more difficult in these buildings. To be honest with you, Eric, if I was going to a fire with you right now, I'd rather go to the fire on the 25th floor of a 30-story residential high-rise building that has just a good old-fashioned center hallway building with stairwells at each end and standpipe hose valve outlets available for us to hook up to on the floor below. I think that fire is a fire that is much less complicated than the fires that we're starting to get in these newer buildings. Whether it be a block-long, shorter building in the low-rise range or a true high-rise building, I always tell firefighters there's four big things that I'm thinking about with regard to those operations. If we have to use a standpipe, we have to remember the standpipe's a low-pressure, high-volume system. And standpipe systems for well over a century have been designed by the fire protection community under the assumption that we, as the fire suppression community, are going to be using 2.5-inch hose. That's how they've been designed, and that's how they're tested. And that becomes part of a problem when fire departments aren't using that as their principal component. I also include in a kind of a four-pronged approach with this that we got to keep in mind this whole issue of modern fire loads. We have to keep in mind the idea of the possibility of wind impact in these buildings. And then most importantly, and you're very well aware of this, working in the district or the battalion you're working in Indy, but it's time. Time's the great equalizer. So whenever I'm doing a training program, and when I did my training program out in Santa Monica last Friday, I always ask firefighters that are attending, I ask them to give me a reasonable amount of time that it's going to take the very best engine company they know on their fire department to get water on a single family dwelling fire. And I specifically I call it a 2,500 square foot ranch. I say fires on the first floor, northeast corner, close to the Bravo Charlie corner. It's in a master bedroom, but I ask them from an air brake to water on a fire and within reach of a 200-foot pre-connect, how fast can they get water on the fire? They're very best engine companies. And most of the firefighters always agree that it's somewhere in the 2-minute range. And I think that's reasonable. When you watch videos on YouTube, that sort of thing, how long can a good fire department get water on that ground-based fire? And then I change it up a little bit for them. I say, oh, okay, now I want you to put that master bedroom on the 25th floor of an apartment in a high-rise building. And I ask them, now be reasonable and think about this. I tell them specifically I'm not throwing any curveballs at them, but I let them know that, as they know, the curveballs are going to be plenty the night of the fire, whether it's an elevator issue or whatever the case may be. But I said, let's say the elevators are working. You have firefighter control of the elevators. You can manage your risk by taking that to the 23rd floor, get out, walk up, hook up on 24, after a reconnaissance, stretch your line and put the fire out, or attack the fire, I should say. And I ask them how much time. And depending on what their frame of reference is, that they give various different times, but it's always much more significant than that ground-based fire. And I explain to them that they should expect and anticipate that they might have 1 minute of reflex time for every vertical flight of travel that they have to make. Not unrealistic that on the 25th floor fire in a high-rise building, it might be 25 minutes before they've got good water on the fire. Now, we'd like to make it faster than that. But if I was to take the very best fire companies in your district in Indy, or the very best fire companies I know of in Denver, we might be able to get water on that fire in the 12 or 15-minute range if we're popping on all cylinders. But the very best among us are still going to have a significant reflex time to get water on that high-rise fire. And it could be as much as 1 minute, per flight of vertical travel. So the reflex time is our great equalizer at these high-rise fires. And the point to all that is, just like you, I try to train and mentor firefighters by letting them know when they arrive at the street and they look up and they see something showing, that's not the enemy. Given ample oxygen and fuel, it's going to be a much more formidable opponent by the time they get up there and they get underway. And that lends itself all the way back to good weapon selection. And I'm a proponent with standpipe operations, as I believe you are as well, that the principal component needs to be 2.5. There's an options for some hybrid stuff and smaller weapons as nozzle sections, but the principal component needs to be that 2.5. And then, Eric, the last thing that I would add on that is there's something I like to refer to as positive control. And that is when we go to a ground-based operation, typically in a single-family dwelling, but even if it's a ground-based operation in a commercial building, we have the benefit of what I call positive control. And positive control involves our pumper. It involves our hose, nozzles, appliances, usually a good water supply system in a large city like yours or mine. But most importantly, the most important component of that positive control is our engineer, our driver pump operator, because you can, given an appropriate water supply on a modern fire pumper, you can absolutely get your 25 GPM out of a booster line all the way up to 1,062 out of the 2-inch tip of a deck gun master string, and everything in between, most notably the 175 GPM out of an 1.75-inch pre-connect. We can absolutely get that. And firefighters get used to using the 1.75-inch pre-connect because it's our workhorse weapon. It takes care of a lot of our fire problems we encounter. Consequently, they'd love to use that on the 25th floor of a high-rise building. But there's a middleman involved, and that middleman is the standpipe system. And we're not sure exactly how that standpipe system is going to perform. But if it's performing optimally, it is designed for use with 2.5-inch hose. It's a high volume, low pressure system. So the reflex time component, the idea of positive control or the lack of it once we put water into an FDC, those are all components that make this particular firefight a more formidable opponent than what we're used to at ground-based operations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was a ton of information and a lot of different things to think about there. I appreciate that. You mentioned standpipes, or you covered standpipes. In my experience, standpipe operations are often where things can go wrong. What are the most common failures you've seen, and how can crews work to prevent those? What are some things that you've identified over the years?
Well, another great question, and let me start by saying this. I think the very best engine company officers that you and I know, and we have the privilege to work with, are engine company officers that study these buildings and identify buildings where they can use option 2. And I always mention this in all of my trainings, and certainly as part of the training of fire officers I work with and mentoring of fire officers. But I tell them that one of the best decisions a fire officer can make upon arrival at a building that has a standpipe in it is to possibly not use the standpipe. So in other words, and I'm really thinking a lot about these new large footprint buildings. I like to refer to these large footprint buildings as modern tenements, if you will, just because they're big, cheap buildings that they're trying to stuff a lot of people inside of. And I mentioned to the fire officers, you get there and there's fire showing on the second or third floor, and you've previously identified that coming out onto Main Street is this door that is to stairwell 1, for example. And if they pre-planned that building and they know that by accessing the second or third floor from that door and from that stairwell, they can stretch from the pumper, maybe a pre-connect or maybe the static hose bed, but they might be able to get that fire from the pumper and maintain positive control. I always let them know that that's a big part of their success at these type operations. With that said, they have to absolutely be ready for the standpipe operation. Some of the failures that I've seen, similar to, I'm sure, the failures you've seen, is one of the big things that we do in our trainings is we always train the firefighters that before we put water in the standpipe line, we need to look at the whole thing. So ideally, if we have two engine companies, two Indianapolis engine companies, two Denver engine companies pair together to stretch and operate this one powerful hand line, with a minimum staffing of 4 and the engineers outside, that gives us 6 guys. 6 guys, officer and 2 firefighters times 2. And you can do a lot with 2.5 with those 6 firefighters. But if we have an attack team that's close to an apartment door and they're calling for water, let's say they're up on the 25th floor, and let's say that I'm working for that fire officer and I'm the control firefighter on the floor below, and that call for water comes. Before we give them water in that hose line, I want to make sure that it's correct. It's been properly stretched. And so we're talking about maybe a 12 to 15 second operation here, but I'm moving into the stairwell. I'm looking at everything in the stairwell all the way up to the fire floor and looking down to the hallway. And that officer usually is coming the opposite direction to meet me. But we want to look at the entire stretch to make sure that it's been done properly, to make sure a door hasn't become unwedged and come over a closed hose line, to make sure there hasn't been any attack hose that slipped into a well hole or somewhere where there's going to be a problem for us, because those are the things that I've seen happen over the years that basically they stop and make that operation. It's a failure. You have to start a new stretch oftentimes. So making sure it's been properly stretched, and then as a control guy going back and giving them water, but giving them water slowly. And I always say giving them water slowly because the hose line that's going up the stairs on the way to the fire floor, it's fighting gravity just by the fact it's going upstairs. If I give water fast and I add weight to that hose line fast, I'm going to pull hose line down. I'm going to push it into a well hole. I'm going to do things that cause a lot of problems. So in terms of that success is making sure that the stretch has been done properly by looking at before we give them water, and then giving water slowly. Now, over the course of time, those engine companies that are really exceptional with this operation, they will add something to it. And Eric, in our training, we refer to it as a gopher creep. And it harkens back to the movie Caddyshack, which I know that your generation and my generation remember that movie. But when I see a hose line being charged, it reminds me of the gopher in Caddyshack that's ruining the greens. But if I'm a control guy and I'm working for an officer and we've trained together and we've worked together, when that call for water comes, or even proactively before the call for water, I might give a little bit of water, a slow amount of water. We call it a gopher creep. And then I'll do my fast inspection to make sure everything's correct. If something bad happened, I can come back and shut the water off. But usually any small corrections can be made. While I'm making those small corrections, the hose line's loading with weight, and it's less likely to move when I finish filling it with water and give proper pressure to the attack team. So there's different pieces of finesse. I call it attention to detail with the standpipe stretch. The last but not least thing, as you know, our fire service is loaded with a lot of really good firefighters who at one point in time or another were on an overpressurized 2.5-inch attack line. And if these 2.5-inch tack lines are overpressurized, it could be a failed operation. At the very least, it's going to leave a bad taste in the mouth of the firefighters that were involved in the operation. Geez, it was way too overpressurized. So if I'm the control guy and the stretch was 150 feet and it calls for 75 PSI from the floor below, I'm probably going to give 70 PSI. And then I can add pressure if necessary, but less is more with regard to the pressure to make this a successful operation. And that's what we're looking for. The last thing that I would give you on this particular question that I would add to it is I find that so many great firefighters across our fire service are waiting for their high-rise fire. They're waiting for their high-rise fire. They're waiting for their standpipe operation. But the reality is, in many parts of your city, especially downtown Indy, in many parts of my city, especially downtown Denver, automatic alarms are happening in these buildings on a daily basis. And the very best engine companies I would work for, it would go something like this. Let's say as District Chief 2, I'm responding with Engine 3, Truck 4, and Chief 2 responding to an automatic alarm in a building we go to a lot. And we get there and there's nothing showing, and the truck makes their way up and the engine makes their way up, and I establish command, and a short time later, command from Truck 4, light smoke condition on the 25th floor, it smells like food. The engine 3 that I got to work with back in the day, and the exceptional engine companies on my job, they're stretching a line. Before that truck officer gets the K and the word smoke out of his mouth, they're stretching a line. And 9 times out of 10, they stretch a line, they get it to the door, the truck guys open up the door to the apartment, there's a pan of beans that's in the sink with water running. The primary search has been done visually, and there's a slider open that's ventilating a light smoke condition. There's a segment of people that would think that that would be a waste of time or unnecessary. But to me, the engine companies that do that, and the good ones are doing that multiple times in a month period. In the 9 shifts that they would work a month, they're doing that multiple times. Every time they stretch, and every time they stretch in a different building, they just get that much better at a standpipe stretch. And they learn some of the idiosyncrasies of a particular building as to what works well, what doesn't work well in that particular building for a standpipe stretch. And then the night that they have to really do it, they're well practiced. And so I always encourage firefighters, take the opportunities you have. Don't wait for the moment to come to you. Make the moment happen by taking the opportunity to do things like a standpipe stretch, because it's going to take us 5 or 10 minutes to build those hose packs back up, get down to the street, and go back available for a response. But taking those opportunities, I think, are some of the things that make engine companies really exceptional with the standpipe stretches. So a couple of items there for you.
So thank you. I'm going to pivot just a little bit here. Take the standpipe out of the equation. Buildings, older buildings, I'm sure you have them. I know we have them, but there are high-rise buildings that don't have standpipes in them, or the standpipe system is out of service. Certainly, we can stretch up through the interior stairwell, and that's going to, be an even more arduous task than just stretching off of a standpipe. But what is your feeling or opinion on either lowering a line down the side of the building or hoisting a line up the side of the building in order to get water, at least in my opinion, potentially get water to that seat of that fire faster? You got any? What's your experience with that? And do you have cutoffs? Anything above 10 or above 8 or something like that? You don't advocate it, or you wouldn't, think of it, or those kinds of things?
No, I think it absolutely needs to be one of the plans in our arsenal. I think back to there's a statement that Chief John Norman makes in his book, The Fire Officer's Handbook of Tactics, and I think it's a very appropriate statement. He says, "Let circumstances dictate procedures." And so the very best engine companies I know are those engine companies that have that small utility rope, and they'll drop that down to pick up a supply to attach perhaps to standpipe packs. Or they might drop it down to pick up the nozzle section of a pre-connect. There's any number of things they can do. Just like you, I know it gets cold in Indianapolis. I've spent some cold hands-on training days in your beautiful city in April, because it can be real nice or really ugly in April in Indianapolis. And it's similar to what it is like in Denver. But I think about parking garages, Eric, and I think about sports venues, the buildings with the manual dry systems, buildings where there are a lot of hose valve outlets that have been opened by somebody, vandals, people playing around, whatever the case may be. We had several fires in the old Mile High Stadium, and one significant fire in the current Mile High Stadium where the Broncos play. But one of the things that we frequently encounter is if you put water in a manual dry standpipe system, sometimes there's open valves and you can't get pressure where you need it. You have water everywhere, but none of it where you need it. So the general playbook for the best officers I know on my fire department for, say, a car fire in a multi-story parking garage or a sports venue with a manual standpipe is they're probably going to take standpipe hose packs in, but they're probably going to drop a rope down to get that supply line. In our case, a 3-inch supply line to bring it up the side of the building to supply those standpipe packs from the floor below. So essentially building their own standpipe. So that's absolutely something I think guys should use. Now, I'm an old school firefighter, and I just remember in 1982 in my first fire academy, I was taught that if you bring hose vertically, if you take hose vertically outside of the building in a well hole, whatever the case may be, if you have a coupling that's off the ground and it's fighting gravity, you could have a separation of the hose there. Now, modern fire hose is a lot more durable and a lot more robustly constructed than old fire hose. There's no doubt about that. But I'm still of the mindset that any coupling that's off the ground, we need to get, in my case, back in the day, it was a running bowline. Today we use the 8 knots, but getting something below that coupling to take the pressure off of it and tie it off. So that's one of the cautionary items I would tell firefighters is to make sure that they do something as quickly as possible so you don't have a separation of a hose coupling from the jacket, because that could mess up the operation. But I'm absolutely all about a rope bag, that sort of thing down below. I am of the school that I know that our pre-piped waterways on aerial apparatus, specifically our tower ladders, could be utilized as a standpipe, but I'm of the belief that once we tie them up as a standpipe is when we're going to need them to rescue somebody about 20 linear feet away from us. So I don't like to tie up aerial devices as a standpipe. I think that you could use the aerial device to assist in building an exterior standpipe, but to not tie up the aerial device with that. The last one I would give you is this, especially if you have to go a long distance. I feel like with our Denver hose packs, you can build an attack line via the interior stairs. And I'm not even talking about a well hole, although a well hole is always an option. But you can build an interior attack line to the higher points of a high-rise building a lot quicker than guys realize. So let me just give you this example. At Chief Kurt Isaacson's programs, County Fire Tactics down there in Pensacola, we've done standpipe operations in that 17-story Hilton high-rise hotel for a number of years. But one of the finality things that we did over the years at the High-Rise Operations Conference, and we're planning on doing it again in November when he hosts that again, is we talk about a standpipe system failure and there's a fire on the 17th floor. So we need to get water to the 16th floor. So we do it as a final evolution for all the attendees, but essentially 3-inch from the pumper to the base of the stairs. We use Denver hose packs, 2.5-inch hose packs, and we start laying them out up the stairs, and we just connect to one after another, all the way up to the point where we're going to hook up to where the attack line has already been stretched. The reality is that we've been able to do that evolution with firefighters from all over the country that had not previously worked together, but they did the evolution. We were able to do it in about the 9-minute time frame, and the pressure required at the pumper was 175 psi. And so it can be built faster than you think. You just have to keep the hose line tight in the stairwell so there's no kinks. And then I'm not sure, I know that you guys use 5-inch supply line. In Denver, our principal supply line is 3-inch. So we have those old-fashioned hose clamps. And if you use the old-fashioned hose clamp on this, what we do is we use 2 hose clamps as we are assembling this, and we clamp the hose so the water can chase the stretch. So we clamp the hose, clamp it a little bit further up, unclamp, and we just leapfrog those clamps to where about the time the stretch is completed, the water is 50 feet behind you. And then there isn't this tremendous reflex time of getting water all the way from the pumper to the nozzle because we have the water chase the stretch. So there's ways that you can do that quickly. if you do have a standpipe system failure. And I think it's an important training component for firefighters, so they understand that if there is a failure in the standpipe, it's not the end of the world. We can do it. We must be able to do it, and there's options for us. So I'm a huge proponent of those things you were talking about.
Well, that's interesting. I've not heard of the leapfrog and the hose clamps like that, but that certainly makes sense. And that's something that I'll have to try out and practice with downtown companies, because that's interesting. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk. We're already talking about standpipes, which are obviously in stairwells. So one of the things that I've always struggled with, there's a lot of things about stairwells that come into play, but I see policies, or I see people talking about designating an attack stairwell and an evacuation stairwell. To me, that sounds good in theory, but how do we control all the people that are in the building who are not clear on which stairwell to use or not use? And now you have people who are piling down the stairwells as you're trying to make it up. Do you have any thoughts on that, or recommendations? It's obviously a challenge that we all either have or will face at some point in our career if we go to one of these taller building fires. But your thoughts on that, designating stairwells, and how do you control those stairwells and those sorts of things?
Absolutely. Another great question. And certainly part of our instruction and our teaching, and certainly policy on my fire department, and I assume it's also policy on your fire department, is we do early on in the operation, after that engine company, probably in conjunction with truck companies, but the engine company officer of that first attack line is going to announce or designate an attack stairwell. It shouldn't be done when they start climbing up the stairwell. It has to be done after they have that comprehensive reconnaissance to find out which one is going to give the best and fastest access to the fire, while we minimize our risk and minimize the risk of the occupants. So we're absolutely going to designate an attack stairwell. The second stairwell in the building would by default become the evacuation stairwell. I always ask firefighters in training programs, I say, do you believe people, civilians, are more inclined or less inclined to follow our instructions post 9/11? And my experience is they're very much less inclined to follow our instructions post 9/11. So, for example, if I was working for you as a systems officer and I made an announcement in a building in downtown Indy, may I have your attention, please, as Chief McGrail, there's a fire in the building, stay where you're at. Stay where you're at. So in an attempt to try and protect as many people in place as possible. I think that a lot of people are not going to follow those orders. I think they're going to head out. They're going to try to use the elevators. If they can't get in the elevators, they're going to try and get into the closest stairwell, whether it's got smoke in it, whether we're in it or not. As you know, oftentimes they're coming down with a bird cage in one hand and a microwave in the other, and they're clogging the stairwell as we're trying to come up the stairs. I think we can try and do some public education ahead of time to let them know how we operate and why we operate in such a way. I think whoever the systems officer is, if there's a public address system in the building, you have to be pretty, you have to use some very forceful communication with people. Don't go into this stairwell because you might die in there. There's smoke in that stairwell. If you're leaving, go out the stairwell. And we can't typically tell them stairwell 2 because they don't know which one stairwell 2 is. We have to say, go to stairwell 2, which is the north stairwell in your building. Do not go to the south stairwell. So try to communicate with them. Try to have some public education ahead of time. And then the case study that is a good one for firefighters to be aware of is Cook County Administration Building in Chicago, Illinois, where there were some civilians that died in an attack stairwell. And part of our operations and part of our procedures is that if we've identified that there are civilians in an attack stairwell, especially if they're above us, we have to communicate with command and let command know we're going to be delayed with our fire attack. We have civilians above us, and we have to do everything we can. We have to do our due diligence to try and get any and all civilians that are above us below that fire attack area. Now, in Denver, and one of the things I do in my trainings is I say that we're going to look at least 5 floors above. If we're doing a stairwell stretch where we have to start from the stairwell, we're going to look at least 5 floors above for any civilians to try and get them cleared out before we open up the door and start the attack. There could still be civilians above us, and part of our procedure would have a 4th truck company searching the stairwells above the fire attack area if conditions allow us to get above, but we're going to try and search those stairwells as well. So there's a load of different things here. I am absolutely a proponent of us designating an attack stair and having an evacuation stairwell as the default other stairwell. Here's the last thing that I would add to this, Eric, and I know that you've got to be encountering this as well, but I was mortified, absolutely mortified recently. The governor of the state of Colorado recently signed a bill that now allows in the state of Colorado for 1 stairwell and newly built multiple dwelling buildings. Now, there would be fire protection people that if they were listening to this or watching me right now, they would say, well, that's for smaller buildings. My belief is the door is open now. And what they're trying to do is it's politics and money, and they're trying to build buildings cheaply and put more people inside of them. And they're taking the second stairwell away from us now in some of these buildings. And even if they're smaller buildings, I think it will lead to happening in larger buildings. And by taking the stairwell away from us, it's like we're moving backwards by a century with regard to fire codes and building codes by doing this. And it's very frustrating to me because politicians, the people with the money, the builders, some in the fire protection community are going to say the building has full fire sprinkler protection. Nothing's going to happen there. But as you and I both know, we've both been to some significant fires and events in buildings that were allegedly fully sprinklered. So that is a huge thing that's happening, and it's not going to make it easy for the firefighters like your son as you pass the baton to him. He's going to see stuff you and I haven't even imagined in these buildings. And, one last thing I would add to that is I had the privilege to go out and teach with some firefighters in the United Kingdom. And we did a presentation there based on some of the philosophies of the United States Fire Service. But when we were there, it was clear to me that in the United Kingdom, they're all about evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. And Grenfell Tower is probably one of the examples where they lost a lot of people, and that's why they're really big on the evacuation. But I also learned that in the United Kingdom, and specifically in that London metropolitan area, when they worked to rebuild London after the damages during the war, they were building buildings very quickly, and they were doing it with really minimal fire codes. Lots of single stairwell buildings in the UK, and so I feel like our fire code's going backwards by going from always having the 2 stairwells to the 1 stairwell now, and it's going to be more difficult for us to evacuate people. Most importantly, it's going to be very difficult for us to attack a fire if that's the only stairwell. And contaminating the stairwell as an attack stairwell, that's not going to leave people with an option to get out of the building. So it's very complicated. Once again, I love the good old-fashioned 60s vintage high-rise building on Massachusetts Avenue in Indianapolis or on Broadway in Denver, Colorado. That is maybe it's a tall building, but it's got a centered hallway and it's got 2 stairwells, 1 on each end. I love those buildings because I feel like that gives us the opportunity to have a successful strategic and tactical operation while trying to manage the risk for us and manage the risk for the occupants. So my thoughts on that.
Well, thank you. That was very informative. I appreciate it. Let's switch gears here a little bit and put our thinking caps on as far as size up goes. So say in the first 5 to 10 minutes, what decisions matter the most and which mistakes are the hardest to recover from?
Okay. Here's my belief on that. The very best fire departments in our fire service, and the ones that I think that do this best are probably some of the very large fire departments. But one of the things that I tell firefighters, and once again, I talked about this extensively in Santa Monica last Friday. The single most important thing that a fire officer in the right front seat of an apparatus can do upon arrival at one of these buildings where there's a working fire is to call for help. And in some of our systems, my system can be guilty of this as well. It's sometimes, it's the battalion chief or the district chief's decision to call for a second alarm. We gotta make sure that in our culture, it can be a lieutenant, it can be an acting lieutenant in the right front seat of a first arriving engine company. If they see smoke or fire from a high-rise building, it's got to be upgraded right now. It has to be automatic. The very best systems will have the upgrade done by dispatch based on confirmation of a working fire. It takes the pressure off the incident commander. If there is smoke or fire showing from a high-rise building, it has to be an upgrade. Most systems like yours and mine, it would be a second alarm or what have you. There's a lot of systems. Mike Walker, the operations chief in Oklahoma City, has got it built to where it goes to a fifth alarm on the front end in that city. Chicago and New York, obviously, organizations. Los Angeles City would be another one that have really robust and significant upgrades in the assignment of resources responding once there's confirmation of a working fire in a high-rise building. I'd say that's the number one failure, is that fire departments are not upgrading or not preparing ahead of time to upgrade that assignment to get the resources responding early on. Now, part of that, too, is identifying ahead of time where are those resources coming from. You know, I've watched your fire department over the years and its growth to where and you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but your fire department has become more of a Marion County fire department that is under the auspices of the Indianapolis Fire Department now. Tremendous resources there and tremendous growth, you know, since the days of the Indianapolis Athletic Club fire. Same with my fire department. Denver is now a 40-station fire department, and four of the stations that are Denver Fire Department stations are in other cities. So cities like the city of Glendale, completely surrounded by Denver, used to be a fire department where they could send 6 guys to a report of a working fire. Now they can send 40 on a first alarm assignment. And whoever gets there first, if they're calling for that upgrade, in our case, the second alarm, they're going to get additional resources very quickly. Thinking back to what I've learned from Chief Vincent Dunn, he said, and he, once again, FDNY is an extremely large organization with a lot of resources, but Chief Dunn says if you can get 100 firefighters into the building and operating in the first 15 minutes of a fire, you're moving in the right direction. Easier for him to do that than a lot of small and medium-sized fire departments across the country, but fire departments have to identify who is our mutual aid, who's our automatic aid, do we have borderless response, are we on the same page, do we use the same SCBA, the same hose packs, can we be on the same operating radio channel? All that stuff has to be taken care of ahead of time because we're going to need a lot of resources at these fires. That to me would be the biggest mistake, is underestimating them, not going into it with a proper mindset, and not having enough resources to operate at that building. Let me finish your question with this, Eric. The second failure that I see is that there are far too many fire departments, usually the small and medium-sized fire departments that have very limited resources to begin with. They're focusing too much attention on the front end of one of these events. They're focusing too much attention on building a command framework. So they're thinking about lobby control. They're thinking about systems. They're thinking about, an outside staging area manager, whatever the case may be. I always tell fire departments, whether you're large, medium, or small, item number one on the front end is to have an operating procedure that puts boots on the ground up to the fire floor as quickly as possible. And my recommendation is 2 engines and a truck company to the fire floor. The first 2 engines and the first truck to arrive to the fire floor to try and get a powerful attack line in service to stop the fire and try to initiate a search from the critical areas outward. And as you know, with many smaller and medium-sized fire departments, that might be all the resources they have on the front end of that. Sometimes they get locked into, when engine one gets there, we're going to have them establish lobby control. Lobby control is important, but to me, it's ideally a chief officer, and it's a skeleton framework on the initial part of the incident, and we're going to try and bolster that as quickly as possible. We got to get a line on the fire, and we have to get a search, and that's got to be the focus on the front end. So I see that as one of the failures that sometimes happens. Fire departments focusing more attention on building a command framework as opposed to building strategic, tactical, and task level operation, and then building a command framework around that. If that makes sense.
No, it does. And thank you. You mentioned something that actually is part of one of the questions I had written down here to ask you. You talked about putting 100 people, 100 firefighters in the building in the first 15 minutes. And whether that number's 100, it's 50, it's 44, whatever the magic number is, right? Now you've got firefighters operating on multiple floors, in various states of fire condition. What are some recommendations you have for incident commanders and branch officers and division officers and things like that to help keep track of those folks and maintain community, without even talking about the troubles that concrete and steel provide to our portable radios? That's obviously a problem in and of itself, but just from an accountability standpoint, keeping track of your people, your organization, I'm sure is very much like mine. And when a fire truck shows up with 4 firefighters on it, they want to do something, right? They don't want to get told to stand in staging or check in with an accountability officer. Certainly those things are important and they need to be done. But at the same time, we've got to balance those sorts of accountability issues with, as you mentioned, we all know if the fire goes out, everything gets better, right? So we've got to be able to cover both of our bases, keep track of communication and accountability and delegation of responsibilities, but at the same time, also know where our people are operating. What are some thoughts you have on that?
Well, and you're absolutely right. The good firefighters that you and I have the privilege to work with, they want to go to work. And when they have an opportunity to go to a fire, they want a piece of the pie, and they'd like to get a good piece of the pie. Most of them are going to want to be on the fire floor or the floor above, as opposed to a stairwell support team or as opposed to lobby control. All of those components are important. I believe that the best accountability system we have in the fire service is certainly good incident command, but good incident command that's built around a comprehensive operating procedure. So, for example, in our system, we know that the first 2 engines from the first truck are going to the fire floor. And when they have the discipline to do that, and I've seen that they do have the discipline to do that, I don't need to know the blood type of the firefighter in the Charlie riding position on engine 2. And I don't need a piece of Velcro with his name on it either. I just know that engine 1 and 2 and truck 1 have gone to the fire floor. And one of those officers, in our system, it's usually the truck officer, is going to be that initial division supervisor. So there's a communication, one-to-one communication from the fire floor to the incident commander, and the incident commander has a span of control of 1, and that division supervisor up there is supervising the operation of 3 companies. That works pretty well, but knowing that's where they're going is part of the accountability. And it doesn't change if there's a lobby control officer on the front end. Okay, where are you guys going? We're going to the fire floor. Well, we knew that from the operating procedure. Second truck company to the floor above, third and fourth engine company to the floor below with another truck company, and on down the line. I think if you have a comprehensive operating procedure that designates the assignment of, let's say, the first and second alarm, then I think we start to build the accountability into that. And then obviously the training of the firefighters, that if you're on your way to your assignment and you encounter something else where you have to divert from that assignment, that's fine. Just say so. Command, we were on our way to do that. we now have to do this. Okay, command says, understood. And then command, if they've called for help, has somebody available that's either arriving or on their way into the building, outside at the base area or inside the building at the interior staging, that they can assign to what was going to be done and now needs to be done by somebody else. That to me is, I think that's what gets us into a good place, is that comprehensive operating procedure, with the understanding that we have to let circumstances dictate procedures if we have to deviate from that. But, I'll listen to different departments, and I've always watched FDNY because they're a large, the biggest and busiest fire department, at least in our country. And I'm always fascinated because when you listen to them at some significant work in fires, including fires in high-rise buildings, oftentimes there's a lot less radio communication than you would have anticipated, because that's one of the fire departments in our fire service that I believe does a really good job of, if you're arriving in this order as an engine company, this is what your assignment's going to be. And when you're arriving on engine company or as a truck company and you're in this riding position, this is what your assignment's going to be. I think we can pre-designate a whole lot of company level assignments and riding position assignments, which minimizes some of the need for the radio communication, and it maximizes our accountability because we know that that company, upon their arrival, was assigned to do this. Eric, I feel like a lot of our modern fire service wants to reinvent the wheel every time we respond to a fire. And I believe a lot of these fires have more similarities than differences. So, for example, we say that there's got to be somebody there that gets there and they establish command, and here comes the first engine company, and command to that engine company that's arriving first, you're going to be fire attack. No kidding. It's like, what if there was something already built in that if you're the first engine company that arrives, you're going to be fire attack? It's not necessarily something that has to be communicated over the radio. It's something that's a given. The accountability then becomes built in, and I like that. I like a procedural type operation, especially with the high-rise, especially because it's a low frequency type event. The other thing that I would add to that, and I know we're approaching that hour, but the other thing that I would add to that is this, and you already alluded to it because you're a guy that has spent time in buildings that are built of concrete and steel, and we know what happens to our communications sometimes with that concrete and steel. So having methods ahead of time to help us with the communication, I think by having the pre-designated assignments, that helps with the accountability and it helps with less of a requirement for communication. But one of the big things is, especially with high-rise operations, if we're not willing to start adding additional radio channels to an incident, nobody's going to get a word in edgewise. So one of the things that I teach is a fire branch with a fire branch director, fire floor, floor above, floor below, an upper branch with an upper branch director on a separate tactical channel, everything above the floor above the fire, and then a support branch director on a separate tactical channel, everything below the floor below the fire. If you can start dividing up, certainly that from an incident management standpoint, but also from a communication standpoint, I believe that when you and I respond to a high-rise fire, we have to be willing and able, with the infrastructure and the training ahead of time, to utilize multiple radio channels. Because if we don't, nobody's going to get a word in edgewise. And with the multiple tactical channels, there needs to also be a command channel to where if I was working for you and you were an incident commander, and let's say I was a branch director for you, let's say I was the fire branch director, I could at some point in time have a more lengthy conversation with you on a command channel, but you and I could leave the tactical channel open for guys to give an urgent message, a routine tactical message, or a mayday, and they're going to have the ability to do it, where you and I could have a 30, 45-second conversation where I could really give you an idea of what's going on up there. Are we winning? Are we losing? So calling for help, a comprehensive operating procedure, and the ability to use multiple radio channels, I think, are really important with regard to this. And I think as you said before, if firefighters know what their assignment is, I have found that the good fire officers and the disciplined fire officers are going to go to that assignment. And if we know they're going to that assignment, our accountability then becomes built in.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. I'm a big advocate for having those. We call it order of arrival and standard company function are the two terms that we use. But people pulling up, if I'm the first engine, fourth engine, fifth engine, knowing ahead of time what my role is going to be, unless, as you mentioned earlier, you encounter something that you weren't anticipating or something happens that wasn't in the rule book, right? We have to make those audibles or call those audibles and make those adjustments on the fly sometime. I'm always struck by this when I travel around and I talk to people about, hey, let me explain to you how this works. The first engine does this, the second engine does that, and they're like, well, how do we know who's going to be the first engine or the second engine or the third engine? I'm like, it doesn't matter whether it's engine 1 or engine 5 is the first engine. It's understanding what that role is for the first engine. It could be any engine number whatsoever or truck company number. So that's very important. And the other thing that I think can be challenging, particularly for company officers sometimes, is to remember, hey, I'm the fifth engine on this, I'm the first engine on the second alarm. What's my responsibility as the first engine on the second alarm? I can't remember, 5 or 6 deep. So even having cheat sheets, and I've seen different options, a laminated sheet that you keep somewhere above your visor or in your fire code or whatever that tells you what you're supposed to do if you're the eighth engine on a high-rise fire, because it does get a little daunting, even for me as an incident commander sometimes, to keep track of, okay, this company's supposed to be doing this company's supposed to be doing that. And then if you're not careful, then you end up just reverting back to your standard operating procedure, which is the incident commander gives somebody an assignment if they don't already have one. And I think that can, potentially create problems as well if you start designating people out of order with what your organization's standard response model looks like. That creates problems as well.
Absolutely. I would just add one thing to that with you is just that, I'm a big proponent of these process firefighters, the guys that go through the process. And what I find is sometimes when we get to something that comes in as a fire and we get there, some of that early size up information causes us to think, oh, this is nothing. Maybe it turns out to be burnt food or a motor or a ballast or something like that. I don't like it when the incident commander stops the train. Hold on, everybody does stage. And I think there are some incident commanders that stage people because they feel like they're losing control. I feel like that's their opportunity to see it through, to see people through and see people getting to these positions. It allows people to practice those positions and understand what their order of arrival assignment is. And once they go through that a time or two on some of the stuff that doesn't turn out to be a major or significant working event, once they go through that on some of the more benign events, I think that starts to build their confidence in terms of what I do upon arrival at this location or that location. So I love it when an incident commander sees something through the process, because even if it is something that is quickly controlled, we can still get companies out of the building and back available for response in a timely manner. But if that second truck company went to the floor above and did a reconnaissance and found absolutely nothing, but they went through the process, I just feel like it's a tremendous learning tool.
Yeah, I think something that as you were talking, you said a few things there that prompted me. I had a conversation just a few weeks ago. We did a walkthrough at a building that's being built here, and the building currently has one standpipe in the building while it's under construction, one functioning standpipe. For a building that is multiples, 15, 20 stories tall, and that is this full city block footprint. So we were kind of brainstorming and working through some options and different things. And the other battalion chief that was there, he asked me for my thoughts on something like this. And I would relate this to any one of these fires, and you may disagree, and if you do, you're not going to hurt my feelings. But I told the companies that were there with us that certainly this is a fire. We know that when we get called to put out, to a fire, our job is to rescue civilians and put the fire out, right? But in my thinking, I think sometimes you almost have to kind of approach these large scale fires, whether it's a high rise fire or something else. But certainly, I think it's more important with high rise, almost like a special operations type run, where yes, there is a sense of urgency, but at the same time, we need to take a second here and really think about what we're doing. And you can have all the pre-designated order of arrival assignments and everything else that we're dealing with, and we have in place on the front end to help these incidents move more smoothly. But at the end of the day, this is not, as you said earlier, a 2,500 square foot ranch with a fire in the master bedroom in the VC corner, right? We can't default to, well, this is what we're going to go in there with our butts on fire and we're going to race up there and bing, bang, boom. And it's all going to go hunky dory, because more than likely it's not. And I don't care how good you are. There's that reflex time. There's going to be unexpected, unanticipated challenges. So I think to a certain degree, we've almost got to kind of whoa the brakes here maybe and run in third gear instead of fifth gear, and obviously still be moving in the direction of getting to the fire floor and removing victims. But do you have any comments on that or thoughts, or you think I'm totally off base?
I think you're right on target, and I love the fact that you would refer to it as a special operation, because one of the things in with regard to the basic fundamentals that with mentoring, with teaching firefighters, even if you see something blowing out a window upon arrival, I tell them, slow down just briefly in the lobby. You still want to go to that command center. You still want to see, even if it's just a primitive annunciator panel, what does that show as the lowest area of alarm? Because what you look at from the outside, it might look like it's the 15th floor, but what is it really? What's the lowest area of alarm? And then making 2 floors below that being your destination, either by stairs or by the elevator, if we can manage the risk to do that. But taking your time, and the 3 things I always ask them to look for arriving first to that building is what are the areas of alarm? What's the condition of the elevators? How many elevators and where are they located? And is there a remote indicator at the command center or at the fire alarm panel that can tell you whether or not a fire pump is running? Those are all really good pieces of information that help you out. And then the other part of that, and you mentioned that, and I'm a big stair climber, but I tell you, every time I climb stairs, and I've been climbing stairs for 42 years now, every time I climb stairs, the first 5 to 10 stairs, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this, man. It's killing me. I always tell firefighters, just as you've said right now, don't get in that stairwell with your butt on fire, because I'll tell you what, you're going to burn out on the 10th floor, and you're not going to make it to 20, and you're certainly not going to have anything left when you get to 20 to go to work. If you got to climb stairs, you got to get into the stairs, you got to start out easy. You got to find out ahead of time what your pace is going to be, even with a little bit of adrenaline. But we've got to be able to get to the location with all of our gear, and then we have to have something left to go to work, because we're the final option. Nobody's coming after us. So we've got to be able to find, what's the tallest building in Indy? What's the tallest building in Denver? Can I climb to the top of that building, and can I still have something left so I can go to work? So I think you're absolutely right. Throttling back just a little bit, taking a deep breath, gathering some information, heading up there with purpose, but having a good pace so that we can get there and have something left. So I like it. And I especially like that you would refer to it as a special operation, because it absolutely is a special operation because of its lower frequency.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad to see that I'm on the same page as a nationally renowned high-rise expert. Makes me feel a little better about myself. So one last question for you here, Chief. And it's you probably can't come up with just one, but if you could change one thing or a couple things about how fire departments train for high-rise fires, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's a great question. I guess the one thing that I would change would be to have them train, because one of the things that I recognize in a lot of fire departments, they're not training at all. So I would say the one change would be find something and train on it, and train on it as frequently as possible. Now, that I know that doesn't really specifically answer the entire question, but if I could just give you 3, the number 1 thing would be train on something. The number 2 thing would be train physically, and help firefighters understand that the physical aspects of the high-rise operation are more demanding than any other operation will go to. And firefighters have got to be in very top physical condition. They've got to be the so-called occupational athletes that we are. That would be a real big part of it there. But doing some training at all, doing the physical training, and then I would also ask that they narrow the focus to the standpipe system. There are so many firefighters that just don't understand that the standpipe system is a low pressure, high volume system. And they believe that they are absolutely going to be able to get away with the use of, say, our 1 3/4 workhorse weapon on the 20th floor. And I think a lot of them believe that, okay, if I need more pressure for that 1 3/4, I'm just going to put more water into the system. These standpipe systems are fragile systems, and sometimes more pressure at the FDC results in blowing apart pipes and no standpipe system at all. So train on something, train on the physical component on a regular basis, help firefighters understand the standpipe system and its low pressure, high volume nature. And what equates to that is the weapons that tie in and can be used with that system. And in our case, and whenever I'm training firefighters, if their principal component is 2.5, they're going to be in a much better place. Even if they're using a 2 1/4 nozzle section, a 2-inch nozzle section, or perhaps even an 1 3/4 nozzle section, if their principal component feeding that nozzle section at a compartmentalized fire is 2.5, they're going to be in good shape. And then the last piece of that is if it's into the hallway and it's no longer compartmentalized, if you got a portion or an entire floor in a commercial building in downtown Denver or downtown Indy, you better be coming out of the chute with all 2.5, and you're going to want to be able to be as powerful as possible, because your window of opportunity for stopping that fire is very narrow and it's rapidly shrinking.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thanks a lot. We've covered a lot of material, and we could spend a lot more time covering other aspects of high-rise firefighting that we didn't even get to today. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge and your willingness to come on the podcast, Chief. Looking forward, looking out into the year and in the coming years, where can people find you? Have you got any programs coming up in the near future that you're going to be offering or delivering? Just tell the audience a little bit, and your book and everything else, just tell the audience a little about yourself as far as where they can find you and how they can get a hold of you and buy your book and all those sorts of things.
Okay. Well, number one, let me thank you. This has been a great conversation, and I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm flattered and honored that you would invite me to be a part of this. I look forward to us maybe doing a part 2 sometime down the road.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll be perfectly honest with you and the attendees here that might be watching this. I don't have a huge social media presence. Just kind of an old school guy. The easiest way to get a hold of me, if somebody wanted to contact me, I have an email address that is McGrail Fire Ops. It's one word. My last name, McGrail, with Fire Ops, one word, @gmail.com. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Here in the month of March, I've been invited with Captain Mike Galliano and his team from the Firefighter Air Coalition to Fire in the Sky. Fire in the Sky conference is going to be in Colorado Springs on March 17th through 19th, and I have the privilege and the honor to present there. My understanding is that conference is almost sold out, but that's going to be one of my next destinations that we're going to. We have we're working for some individual fire departments just with McGrail Fire Ops alone at different locations. And obviously, I always look forward to seeing you in your great city in April at FDIC, and I'm doing a program there as well. But if anybody wanted to get a hold of me, or if they would like a program in their corner of the fire service, McGrailFireOps@gmail.com. Like I say, I don't spend a lot of time on a whole lot of other social media stuff. I don't advertise that sort of thing, but I'm certainly willing to help anybody out, even if they just want to have a conversation or an email correspondence, that sort of thing. So That's the next one, though, is the Fire in the Sky Conference in March 17 through 19, and it's being held in Colorado Springs this year. So, but happy to help anybody out anytime they called, or text, or send an email. Email would be the first way to try and get a hold of me. And like I say, I've certainly always admired your fire department and the growth of that fire department. Is such a cool place, and one of the best things of the year is going to Indy at FDIC, and that's a big recharge your batteries event for me. Always has been. So happy that I've been able to be a part of that for the past 30 plus years. So, and really admire the work that you're doing in your corner of the fire service. So, thank you so much for the invite today and the great questions and the great conversation.
I appreciate it. It wouldn't have been, it's all about you. This is your episode. I'm just here to facilitate, but I do appreciate the compliments. Thank you.
Yep.
So as we close out this morning, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're coming up on FDIC very rapidly. I know that the hot classes will sell out again. They've expanded the hot classes this year, but I encourage you and your organization, if you haven't registered yet, to please do so, because it's always well attended, and it will sell out, particularly the hands-on programs. So with that, on behalf of Fire Engineering, the Fire Engineering Training Network, my name's Eric Dreiman, and this is the Hooks and Hoses podcast, and we'll see you all again in March.